developed with different themes in mind. The DreamWorks Experience Zone, for example, featured several attractions that tied in with popular DreamWorks films, such as Kung Fu Panda and Madagascar. The Town of Gold Rush zone was themed after the Australian gold rushes of the 1800s. The Thunder River Rapids ride was one of the main attractions situated there when the zone opened in 1986. The basic design of the ride might be familiar to any theme park enthusiast, as it resembles hundreds of other river rapids rides around the world. Many rides of this type in other parks are designed and built by Intamin, a well-known and reputable ride design and manufacturing company. The River Rapids ride at Dreamworld, however, was custom built by the park itself. Riders at Dreamworld would board circular 6-person rafts from a constantly rotating station platform, which allowed easy boarding without boats having to come to a complete stop. Once dispatched, each raft would travel at a modest pace along a watercourse that included a tunnel and several sections of simulated whitewater rapids. Boats were bumped, jostled, and splashed unpredictably as they moved along a curving channel. Part of the fun of the ride arose from the fact that some riders would inevitably get wetter than others. The course of the ride was on a gentle downward gradient. This was what caused the water within the channel to flow, thus conveying the boats along without the need for an onboard propulsion system. Naturally, this meant that, by the end of the ride, rafts would need to be lifted back up to the station before they could be sent around again. At Dreamworld, this was achieved by means of a conveyor belt. Boats were guided onto it and carried upwards with guests still on board. When it reached the top and returned to the station, guests would disboard back onto the rotating station platform. Just as the rafts needed to be lifted back up at the end of a circuit, so too did the water, something normally achieved by 2 powerful water pumps. On the 25th of October 2016, one of these pumps failed, which caused the water level in the ride to drop significantly. This resulted in a raft which had just reached the top of the conveyor belt becoming stranded on support rails. There wasn't enough water in the channel to carry it onwards, and so it was stuck just short of the ride station. The conveyor belt, however, continued to move, carrying up another raft. This raft, holding 6 guests, collided with Raft 1, causing both to pivot upwards. Raft 1 fell back into a horizontal position, while the continued movement of the conveyor belt forced Raft 2 into a vertical position. 4 of the occupants of Raft 2 were thrown out and onto the conveyor belt. The conveyor belt was, at this stage, still moving. The victims were either dragged beneath the stranded raft and crushed, or fell through the gaps in the belt and became trapped in the machinery beneath. All 4 of them were killed. There were 2 survivors from Raft 2, both children. They were able to cling onto the raft even in its vertical position, and later clamber to safety once the conveyor belt had stopped. The ride was evacuated and the park closed as a recovery operation took place. Even once all the water had been drained from the ride, it took until the next morning to retrieve the bodies. The process of doing so was so traumatic that some of the paramedics involved required counselling once it was complete. The park remained closed for a month, both out of respect for the dead and to allow an investigation to be completed. The results of this investigation would take several years to emerge, but when they did, they were damning. There had been a litany of failures on the part of the park. Rudimentary safety features had not been implemented on the ride, even though they would have been extremely inexpensive. There was no automatic water level indicator, for example. No holistic risk assessment had been completed, and the task of identifying risks was left to the staff of the ride, none of them trained engineers. Maintenance staff did not know the location of the emergency stop button in the main control room, and never tested it. Improvements to safety features were deferred because of budgetary concerns. Record keeping was described as shoddy. The ride was described as completely unsafe, and it was concluded that there had been failures on the part of everybody at the park. It is important to note that these criticisms were directed specifically at the Dreamworld Thunder River Rapids ride. Other rides of this type, when properly managed and risk assessed, are extremely safe for guests. Dreamworld cooperated fully with the investigation, and when charges were finally laid against them under the Work Health and Safety Act in July 2020, they pled guilty without hesitation. The parent company of the theme park, Ardent Leisure, received a fine of $3.6 million, the largest fine ever handed out for a workplace tragedy in Queensland. The ride itself was demolished in November 2016, and Dreamworld plans to build a memorial garden in its place. They have invited those affected by the tragedy to be involved in its design, an offer which has angered some of the survivors' families, as they are still awaiting actual compensation from the park. The victims of this disaster included Kate Goodchild, who boarded the ride with her 12-year-old daughter, her brother Luke Dorset, and his partner Rusbeh Aragi. Kate's daughter was the only one from that group to survive. Also killed was Cindy Lowe. Her 10-year-old son was the only other survivor from the affected raft. All 4 victims were on holiday. They had visited Dreamworld to experience its rides and roller coasters, fully believing that these attractions were safe. This was a reasonable belief, as many regulatory standards exist to ensure that amusement park rides are as safe as possible. The incident at Dreamworld, which cost them their lives, shows, however, that these standards can only work when ride owners and operators actually deign to apply them. Dreamworld overhauled its safety procedures across the park and reopened a month after the tragedy. It has continued to operate ever since. The site of the Thunder River Rapids ride is currently vacant. The construction of the Memorial Garden is currently on hold.
This video is sponsored by NordVPN. Use the link on screen and in the description to get 68% off a 2-year plan with 4 additional months free. Stay tuned for more details.
On the 25th of October 2016, at the Dreamworld theme park in Australia, a river rapids ride malfunctioned. The failure of a water pump precipitated a deadly accident that claimed 4 lives in a matter of moments, an accident which, later investigation would reveal, could have been prevented. Dreamworld was opened in 1981 with a modest collection of attractions. These included an IMAX theatre, a model train, a log flume, and a vintage car ride. Over the decades that followed, the park grew steadily, acquiring several roller coasters, a wildlife park, and numerous other rides. Sections of the park were developed with different themes in mind. The DreamWorks Experience Zone, for example, featured several attractions that tied in with popular DreamWorks films, such as Kung Fu Panda and Madagascar. The Town of Gold Rush zone was themed after the Australian gold rushes of the 1800s. The Thunder River Rapids ride was one of the main attractions situated there when the zone opened in 1986. The basic design of the ride might be On the 15th of March 1931, the sealing ship the SS Viking was stopped alongside an ice floe near the Horse Islands off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. The crew were getting ready to turn in for the night. Some rested, some read or talked to pass the time, and one man, filmmaker Louis Varick Frissell, sat in the saloon, drawing up signs that he intended to post around the ship, warning crew to exercise caution around the explosives stored on board. As night fell on this peaceful scene, however, the ship would be torn apart by a massive and unexplained explosion, one of the deadliest in the history of filmmaking. Born in 1903, Louis Varick Frissell began making films at a young age. It was initially one of many hobbies. Frissell was from a wealthy background and could afford to pursue whatever interests he chose. He documented much of his life and work in still photographs, and later with moving images. It wasn't until 1925, however, that he completed and screened his first real documentary. At the time, he was volunteering in Labrador in Canada with an organisation run by the medical missionary Wilfrid Grenfell. Frissell found Grenfell extremely inspiring and derived great satisfaction in working with him to deliver medical supplies and build infrastructure across the remote and rugged Labrador Peninsula in Canada. Frissell may have thought of Grenfell as something of a mentor. Thus, when Grenfell suggested that Frissell take an exploratory canoe trip along the Hamilton River, he was only too glad to do so. Footage shot during this long, challenging and lonesome voyage was made into Frissell's first ever short documentary, The Lure of Labrador, which was released to generally positive reviews in 1925. In this way, Frissell's career as a filmmaker and his long association with the Newfoundland and Labrador region began. Over the next few years, Frissell would take on a variety of filmmaking-related jobs, but he never forgot his experiences in Labrador. By 1930, he had resolved to make a feature-length film set in the region, one that would both tell a dramatic, absorbing story and also showcase the beauty and the danger of the landscape and the bravery and hardiness of the people who worked there. Frissell secured investment, agreeing that he himself would only be paid if the film was successful. Paramount Pictures agreed to distribute the finished film and supplied an experienced director. The film would be called White Thunder and would follow the story of a sealing expedition upon which two men who vied for the love of the same woman embarked. As the story progressed, their rivalry would culminate in one attempting to kill the other, before they were ultimately forced to rely on one another in an emergency and thusly make amends. White Thunder would be a Hollywood first. Since authenticity and atmosphere were to be so important to the picture, it was decided that sound would be captured on location with magnetic wire recorders, something that had never been done for a feature-length Hollywood film before. Filming took place in Quidi Vidi, a relatively sheltered cove in the southern part of Newfoundland. To capture authentic action sequences, however, Frissell insisted on sailing further north to shoot some action sequences in Labrador. By making use of the breathtaking scenery there, some incredible and terrifying scenes were captured. Frissell screened his film in early 1931 and it received a lukewarm response. Frissell himself wasn't happy with it. It was clear to him that the picture focused too heavily on the fictional love story, while it was the stunning landscape and perilous exploration that made it compelling. Frisell made the decision to rework the film, a decision reinforced when Paramount Pictures declined to distribute the film in its current state. He would go back, he decided, with a smaller crew and gather more dramatic footage from Labrador to splice into the film. In this way, he hoped to deliver a finished piece that truly captured the majesty and danger of the place he loved. So Frisell went back. He and a small crew hitched a ride on the sealing vessel, the SS Viking, as it set out to hunt around the Horse Islands off the coast of Newfoundland. Being on board a real working ship would allow him to capture a lot more authentic footage, with which he hoped he might be able to rescue his struggling film. The voyage initially went well, though it was not without excitement. 2 young stowaways were discovered shortly after the ship's departure, but the decision was made not to turn back to offload them, and instead to keep them on board until the Viking returned home and they could be handed over to the police. They were allowed room and board with the crew until then. A few days later, on the 14th of March, Frisell's men set up a makeshift projection room and screened some of their existing footage for the entertainment of the crew. It went down well. The voyage, so far, was a happy one. Then, 6 days after setting out, on the 15th of March 1931, the ship came up against heavy ice near the Horse Islands. The decision was made to settle in for the night, and the vessel was run up against the ice and made secure there. At this point in time, there were about 150 people on board, sealers, film crew, and stowaways included. Also present was a much-loved ship's dog, a Newfoundland named Cabot. As night fell, those aboard made ready to turn in for the night. On deck, they smoked and talked. In their bunks, they read and slept. Frisell himself remained awake in the ship's saloon, drafting signs on scrap pieces of cardboard. The ship had explosives on board for blasting through the ice, along with dynamite and flammable film. Frisell had noticed some of the crew being incautious around this explosive material, including smoking close by it. He decided to make up warning signs and also advised the crew to dispose of some faulty flares that he had noticed on board as a precaution. Before Frisell could finish this task, a mighty explosion shook the ship, causing it to list dangerously to one side. More explosions followed the first. Crew were flung from their beds, slid across the sloping deck, or were blasted through the wooden sides of the ship. Within moments, the SS Viking went up in flames. The cause of the explosion was never definitively determined, but it is believed that it may have been a carelessly discarded cigarette. Whatever caused the blast, several men were killed instantly, while others fled the ship in a panic, sustaining serious injuries as they jumped or were thrown from the Viking down onto the ice. The explosions were so significant that they were mistaken for an earthquake by nearby settlements. When the burning Viking was spotted in the distance, however, it was understood what had happened, and rescue ships were quickly dispatched. At least 50 survivors, rather than awaiting rescue in freezing conditions, hiked perilously across the ice to reach the Horse Islands, where they were taken in and given medical care. Others, including those too injured to walk, took shelter where they were. Having escaped the blaze on board the ship, they found themselves struggling to make fires to stay warm until rescuers arrived. Still others were now adrift, including 3 men who had been thrown onto a moving ice floe with only a small piece of wooden wreckage for shelter. After drifting for 2 days, they were rescued. One of them was wireless operator Clayton L. King. He had suffered serious injuries in the explosion, and his legs were amputated due to gangrene. Miraculously, he survived and went on to write and publish a full account of the disaster. Not everyone was so lucky. 28 people died in the explosions or of their injuries or exposure shortly afterwards. Among them were Frisell and most of his crew. One of the 2 stowaways was killed, and the ship's Newfoundland dog, Cabot, did not survive. The Viking itself was almost completely destroyed. The majority of its remains sank beneath the water and were never recovered. In the aftermath of the disaster, the film that 28 people had lost their lives in the making of was eventually released. It was retitled The Viking, and began with a foreword by Frissel's close acquaintance and mentor, Wilfred Grenfell, who spoke affectionately of Frissel's heroism, determination, and dedication to the cold and rugged part of the world in which he had ultimately lost his life. The fact that the film had cost so many lives was used as part of the film's marketing on its release. Despite this, it did not perform particularly well. It received mediocre reviews from critics who praised the cinematography, the sound, and the use of the dramatic landscape of Labrador, but who found the story contrived and even distracting. The film itself was soon forgotten, outlived by the memory of the accident that had marred its filming. To this day, the explosion of the SS Viking remains the largest single loss of life in filmmaking history.
Let's go.